Welcome back to the continuing saga of the Apostle Paul in the book of Acts, looking at chapter 23, 1 to 35, Paul's defense before the Sanhedrin. 23:1 says, Then Paul looked earnestly at the council and said, Men and brethren, I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. So the next day is what the last verse in chapter 22 says, and that's exactly where we are. Paul is looking at them earnestly. It means intense, to have his eyes fixed on all of them, looking steadfastly upon the council. Was Paul trying to make a connection with them, or even trying to stare them down? There's also a possibility he was trying to see if he recognized any of his former acquaintances of 25 years ago. Ezekiel 3:8-9 says, But now I am making you as defiant as they are, and as obstinate as they are. I'm making you resolution as hard as a diamond, harder than flint. So do not be afraid of them. Do not be overawed by them, for they are a tribe of rebels. Men and brethren, again, this is not my brethren in Christ, but those of the same nation. I have lived in all good conscience before God until this day. The conscience is part of our inner being. It either accuses us of doing wrong or excuses what we have done as acceptable. But we know that Paul had Christians killed and imprisoned. That tells us that the conscience is not an error-free guide to make decisions by. Your conscience needs to be educated. In addition, the conscience can be rejected or seared as with hot iron if we choose to. 1 Timothy 1 verse 19 says, Keeping the faith and good conscience which some have rejected and suffered shipwreck in regard to their faith. By means of hypocrisy of liars, seared in their own conscience as with a branding iron. Thus the conscience is a wonderful gift from God. However, it must be educated by the Word of God in order for it to be effective as God intended it to be. It is possible for a person to live for so many years in error, believing that he is pleasing God. Acts 24:15, having a hope in God, which these men cherish themselves, that there are certainly be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. In view of this, I also do my best to maintain always a blameless conscience, both before God and before men. What Paul is saying to them is, I was exactly like you, but I changed. I'm not blind anymore. God saved me. The high priest at this time was a man called Ananias. It is not Annas nor Caiaphas. How does he react to Paul's statement? He commanded that Paul be hit in the mouth. Why? He was offended when Paul mentioned that he had lived his life in a good conscience before God. Remember that people always react like this when they see differences between them and us. The way we live and what we say is an offense to many of them. John 18:22, when he had said this, one of the officers standing nearby struck Jesus, saying, Is that the way you answer the high priest? The law didn't permit for anyone, unless he is found guilty of a crime in the court of law. He could not be condemned before being examined. Paul is now fixing his eyes on them in anger and in pain because of how false they were towards God and men. Ananias was a whitewashed wall, in other words, a hypocrite, because he pretended to be following the law in his judgment of Paul, but he broke it when he had Paul, an innocent man, struck. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but inside are full of dead men's bones and everything unclean. On the outside you appear to people as righteous, but on the inside you're full of hypocrisy and wickedness. Paul's prediction that God would smite Ananias came true, according to Josephus, the Jewish historian, who was a witness of these things. Ananias was slain with Hezekiah, his brother, during the agitation that occurred in Jerusalem when robbers or Sicarii, under the leader Menahem, had taken possession of the city. He attempted to conceal himself in an aqueduct, but was drawn forth and killed. The bystanders were shocked at the way Paul spoke to the high priest and rebuked Paul for this outburst. Those who stood by might be servants or deputies in the service of the court. Why did they not complain about hitting an innocent man in the mouth? Man's justice is often like that, unfair and arbitrary. In the Old Testament, God had set up a system that was supposed to ensure that proper justice was carried out. The Sanhedrin was based on the 70 who were chosen in the desert to assist Moses and the tribal leaders make policy decisions and adjudicate the more difficult questions of law and justice. The Sanhedrin was assembled of either 23 or 71 elders brought into being around 516 BC. They were appointed to sit as a tribunal in every city in the ancient land of Israel. It was the only body that theoretically had the power to discipline kings and rulers of the nation. Under the Romans, it was limited in its power and restricted to making judgments concerning matters related to the religion and culture of the Jewish nation. That Sanhedrin was a senate of the Jews, the idea based on the Council of 70 appointed by Moses in the desert. It composed the high priest, other senior priests, and leading scribes and rabbis. It also included many of the rich and powerful men among the Jews of the time. Many positions in the Sanhedrin were hereditary. It could exact the death penalty on Jewish lawbreakers, but it couldn't crucify. But under Rome in 6 AD, it lost the power to apply the death penalty without Rome's consent. These words have been given several interpretations. Paul says, I do not know, brethren, that he was the high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people. Some of us suppose that Paul said to them in irony, as if saying, pardon me, brethren, I didn't consider this man with such an attitude was the high priest of the Lord. Some of us suggested Paul was admitting that he spoke hastily. Another has suggested that Paul had been away from Jerusalem and was not aware of the changes of the priesthood. There were almost 28 different high priests between 37 and 70 AD. The Jewish priests, all descendants of Aaron, changed positions each year. It's logical to assume that Paul is telling the truth. He didn't know who was the high priest that year. The Jewish law forbade speaking evil of a ruler of the people. Name-calling and insults to a ruler of the people were a serious offence, for which the offender could be beaten with 40 lashes. If God told the people not to speak evil of the rulers, would it not be a good thing if our citizens show more respect for our elected leaders, assuming that they earn our respect? Our laws are soft on those who malign public figures, whereas libel and slander of private individuals can bring a heavy financial penalty in a court of law. Paul did not only respected the princes of the people of God, but even more so. He wrote later that we need to learn how to respect human laws and not be disobedient, but rather obedient whenever they are commanded something, as long as it is not contrary to the law that came from God. Romans 13:1 says, let every soul be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and the authorities that exist are appointed by God. The principle of government is something that God has appointed. Therefore, whoever resists authority resists the ordinance of God, and those who resist will bring judgment on themselves. Paul has now been studying the crowd. He notices something in them. He says he noticed the crowd was full of Pharisees and Sadducees. Enough of the talking. Let me tell you who exactly I am. I was a Pharisee. My father was a Pharisee. I believe I have hope in the resurrection of the dead. Verse 6 says, when Paul saw one part were Sadducees and other Pharisees, he cried out to the council, men and brethren, I am a Pharisee, the son of a Pharisee. Concerning the hope and resurrection of the dead, I am being judged. For this reason I'm being judged right now. Verse 7 says, and when he said this, a dissension arose between the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The assembly was divided. I think Paul saw that the Inquisition was going unfavourably for him, so he injected the controversial bone of contention of the resurrection to divide the Sanhedrin and bring them to an indecisive standstill. Paul knew the Sanhedrin wouldn't judge him with a right judgment. He knew that they were divided into Pharisees and Sadducees. Some tried to say that Paul was trying to cause division. You cannot divide what is already divided, and this is what happened in this case. Matthew 23 to 33, the Sadducees were materialistic like the modern Jehovah's Witnesses of today. They deny the immortality of the soul. Why are so many committed to denying the resurrection? Because if it is the resurrection, then there will also be a judgment. That's why. For the same reason many deny the Creator God. Because if they confess there is a God, as there is, Then they will face being judged by what they have done, and this is not a pleasant thing. Verse 1, Romans 1:18 says, "For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth in unrighteousness." Verse 9, "Then arose a loud outcry, and the scribes of the Pharisee party arose and protested, saying, We find no evil in this man. But if a spirit or an angel has spoken to him, let us not fight against God." What we have now is a result of what happens when people are not sure about what they believe and practice. They start making noise and confusing one another. The Pharisees were the first to speak in favour of Paul. "We find no evil with this man." Yet they had disagreed with Paul in 22:22, and they listened until this word, and then they raised their voice and said, "Away with him, such a fellow from the earth. He is not fit to live," when Paul introduced God's plan for the Gentiles. But now Paul is speaking in their favour concerning the resurrection. They said, "We find no fault, he is innocent." They're saying this and will continue to as long as they embarrass the Sadducees. What were the Pharisees likely referring to when they talked about Paul seeing a spirit or an angel? Remember what Paul said, "About noon I came near Damascus. Suddenly a bright light from the heaven flashed around me. I fell to the ground and heard a voice say to me, 'Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?'" Notice that the Sanhedrin are acting exactly like a regular people. They want to destroy Paul inside the place where they pretend to judge him. Even the commander noticed that they want to kill the man of God. He's basically taking Paul out of their hands before they tear Paul to pieces. Verse 10 says, "Now there arose a great dissension. The commander, fearing lest Paul might be pulled to pieces by them, commanded his soldiers to go down and take him by force from among them and bring him into the barracks." This group is not here to judge according to God, but to kill those who do not agree with him. Paul is again rescued from the murderous intention of the Jews. Paul will be kept in the barracks for his own protection until the commander can see a resolution to the case. Verse 11 says, "The following night the Lord stood near Paul and said, 'Take courage, as you have testified about me in Jerusalem, so you must also testify in Rome.'" So Paul is not alone in all this. The Lord is with us even when we need him the most. Paul has been abused and betrayed, but the Holy Spirit has plans for him. "You must testify to me in Rome." He won't be killed in Jerusalem. That's why Paul ends up appealing to Caesar, to Rome and to the Caesar. God has a purpose for him in Rome. God, through his foreknowledge, knows that what is happening is settling things up for Paul to be carried safely to Rome. Paul will be protected by the resources of the greatest empire on earth. These people are not people of God. They are killers who are thirsty for innocent blood. Verse 12 says, "When it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under an oath, saying they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. The vow is not to eat or drink until they kill Paul." These people are angry. 1 Kings 19:2, "Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah, saying, 'So may the gods do to me, and even more, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by tomorrow about this time.'" 1 Samuel 14:24, "The men of Israel were so hard pressed on that day for Saul, had put the people under oath, saying, 'Cursed be the man who eats food before evening until I have avenged myself on my enemies.' So none of the people tasted food." 2 Samuel 3:35, "When all the people came to persuade David to eat bread when it was still day, but David vowed, saying, 'May God do so to me, and more also, if I taste bread or anything before the sun goes down.'" Verse 13, "There were 40 men who had formed this conspiracy." With this we can believe and understand it was not the whole group in the Sanhedrin who made this oath, but some of those who were involved. Perhaps just the Sadducees, some of the younger men who were the ones promising to destroy the man of God. There will always be those who wish to stop us from proclaiming and defending the gospel of Christ. The oath that these men are taking is a provocation against God, and for this God punishes these people in year 70 when the Romans came and destroyed them completely. Paul feels safe in the Roman army barracks, unaware of the Jews' conspiracy to lure him out to assassinate him. They already plan how they're going to kill him. Verse 15 says, "Now you therefore, together with the council, suggest to the commander that he be brought down to you tomorrow, as though you were going to make further inquiries concerning him, but we are ready to kill him before he comes near. 1. Tell the council to bring him. 2. While you pretend to make future inquiries. 3. We are going to kill him when he comes near. Deliver me, O Lord, from evil men. Preserve me from violent men, who plan evil things in their hearts. They continually gather together for war. Verse 16. So when Paul's sister's son heard of their ambush, he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. What destroyed their whole plot was not the good luck from Paul, but the providence from God. The young man was Paul's nephew, the son of Paul's sister, who lived in Jerusalem. He was the one who discovered the whole plot and went and told Paul in the barracks about what these men were planning to do against him. Verse 17, then Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, take this young man to the commander, for he has something to tell him. Paul is sending the young man to the commander. He didn't want his nephew to talk to the centurions, but to the main man, the commander. The Lord is for me. I will not fear. What can man do to me? The Lord is for me among those who help me. Therefore I will look with satisfaction on those who hate me. It is better to take refuge in the Lord than to trust in man, the psalmist says. Hebrews 13:6. So we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper, I will not fear. What can man do to me? So, verse 18 says, he took him before the commander and said, Paul the prisoner called me to him and asked me to bring this young man to you. He has something to say to you. For some reason, they listened to Paul. And now they bring the young man to the commander and explain to him the reason for all of this. Is this young man or a child? Some believe we're talking about a child. We don't know how old or all the circumstances, but some believe that this is a child because of the way the commander spoke to him. Verse 19, then the commander took him by the hand, went aside and asked him privately, what is it you have to tell me? Yet judging from the language he uses as he explains the plot, he gives advice to the commander. It's obviously he's probably in his teens. All we really know is that he had some important information that even the commander is willing to listen to. Everyone is now interested with all that is happening in Jerusalem against Paul, and even the commander is willing to listen to the story. Verse 20 says, and he said, the Jews have agreed to ask you to bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire more fully of him. He's telling the commander of the whole plot against his uncle. Let's all keep in mind that the providence of God is with Paul on this occasion. One of the members of his family is helping him through God's hand to save his life and to move him towards the preaching of the gospel of Jesus. Verse 21 says, we do not yield to them, for more than 40 of them will lie in wait for him. Men who have bound themselves by an oath they will neither eat or drink, till they have killed him, and now they are ready, waiting for the promise from you. Liars are many times found out. Their plan has been discovered, and now these men can or will face big problems for what they are doing at this point. They want to take justice into their own hands, but now the authorities have been warned, and they will be prepared to respond to it. Verse 22 to 23, so the commander let the young man depart and commanded him, tell no one you have revealed these things to me. And he called for 2 centurions, saying, prepare 200 soldiers, 70 horsemen, 200 spearsmen to go to Caesarea at the 3rd hour of the night. The commander is taking all this very seriously. He's preparing many people in order to protect Paul. 2 centurions, 100 soldiers each, 270 horsemen, 200 spearmen, 470 men. There are probably many Jews who would help the 40 who had bound themselves by an oath not to eat or drink until they had killed Paul. Verse 24, and provide mounts to set Paul on and bring him safely to Felix the governor. Several horses are taken for Paul so he could change mounts when the ridden one was tired. From Jerusalem are taking Paul to Caesarea to the governor there. His name was Felix. Felix was an unscrupulous ruler. In addition to having 3 wives, he considered free to commit any crime and avoided punishment because of his influence with the courts. Because of Felix's tyranny, a group of Jewish revolutionaries known as Sicarii assassins flourished. Retaliation against the Sicarii by the Roman government eventually led to the downfall and destruction of Jerusalem. Verse 25 and 26, he wrote a letter in the following manner, Claudius Lysias to the most excellent governor Felix, greetings. The letter speaks for itself. It's simply Lysias, the chief captain, relating the events and putting the case before the higher court of Felix, the governor. Remember, we're dealing with a corrupt man who is not interested in what is clean and fair, but in doing all that is crooked and wrong. Claudius Lysias is calling him most excellent, but that's just a formality among them. He's not excellent in any way. Verse 25-26, this man was seized by the Jews, about to be killed by them. Coming with troops, I rescued him, having learned he was a Roman. The chief captain was apparently a man of honour, justice and decency, a man committed to doing right. When he came to understanding the charges against Paul, all he could say was that Paul was accused of their law. He didn't understand the issue because he was ignorant of God's law and word. Verse 29-30, I found the accusations to do with questions about the law, but there was no charge against them that deserved death or imprisonment. When I was informed of a plot to be carried against this man, I sent it to you at once. I also ordered his accusers to present to you their case against him. The only thing I know, says Claudius, is the whole problem is here about their law. The problem is not a crime, he does not deserve death, but religion is their problem. Here's a soldier, a military man. We are talking about not about politics, but about matters of religion. Lysias admits that he is ignorant of the cause. The man was seized by the Jews and about to be killed by them. Coming with troops, I rescued him. Paul was declared innocent by Gallio, proconsul from Achaia, Claudius Lysias, commander, Festus, Roman governor, and King Agrippa, king of the Jews. There was nothing wrong done by this man, but still they want to examine him. Remember what happened to the Lord Jesus? We get the impression that Luke saw and copied this letter. The commander, Claudius Lysias, spun his account to put his actions in the best light. The story about how and when he learned that Paul was a Roman citizen was a slight manipulation of the truth, to put it charitably. He probably hadn't yet ordered Paul's accusers to present a case before the governor yet, but he planned to do that as soon as Paul was safely at Caesarea. The next day, verse 32 says, they left horsemen to go with them and returned to the barracks. The infantry went to cavalry as far as Antipatris. This is about half of the 70 miles to Caesarea. They stopped there until morning, probably sleeping a few hours. The next morning, the infantry returned to Jerusalem, leaving the 70 men of the cavalry to take Paul the rest of the way to Caesarea. By the end of the second day, Paul was probably safely settled in Herod's palace. Herod had many palaces. One was in the Roman capital of Palestine. Why send the cavalry on and the other soldiers back? Good question. Paul is now in front of one of the authorities that will hear his case and then try to make a decision based on his explanation. Remember what Jesus says concerning being brought in front of the authorities? Watch out for yourselves, for they will deliver you up to councils. You will be beaten in the synagogues. You will be brought before rulers and kings for my sake, for a testimony to them. 34-35, the governor read the letter and asked what province he was from. Landing was from Cilicia. He said, I will hear your case when the accusers get here. Then he ordered that Paul be kept under guard in Herod's palace. Do you think Paul will be safe in Herod's palace? The rich and powerful Jews in Jerusalem had a lot of influence with the Roman rulers. Remember what Pilate did when they demanded that Jesus be crucified. Will Paul rely on his rights as a Roman citizen to ensure his protection on a trip to Rome? Ellis has a poem. As your days, so shall your strength be. I will never leave you, nor forsake you. God didn't promise sunshine without rain, skies forever blue, pleasure without pain. But he has promised strength for every day, light for the darkness, to show you the way. When the lightnings flash and the thunders roll, he'll send the rainbow and peace for your soul. He will go with you and not leave your side, if you will trust him and in him abide. Thank you for your patience, and I hope you come back and be with us again as we continue Paul's journey and see his defense before Felix.